All right, today we are talking about mass movements. Mass movements are the transfer of rock and soil down a slope due to gravity. So, mass movements and weathering produce most of the landforms on Earth, including streams and valleys. There are 4 triggers of mass movements. So the first one is water. So the ground must be saturated in most cases, and that kind of loosens the chemical bonds between and the physical bonds between the soil particles. And that's accomplished by heavy rain and snow. Over steepened slopes, so slopes that have a really steep angle of 25 to 40 degrees, those will actually hold loose particles. If the slope is greater than 40 degrees, the soil is more likely, or the sediments are more likely to come down the bank. So anything like 45 degrees, 50 degrees, once you start getting to that slope, it becomes more likely that you're going to have a landslide. If there are no plants there to hold the soil in place, that's going to increase the likelihood of a mass movement. And then earthquakes. So with that shaking of the ground, a lot of times the soils are loosened and they will slide right on down a hillside. All right, so we have 3 things that geologists use to classify mass movements. The first one is the type of material that moves. So we're looking at particle size, whether it is a sand, a pebble, a rock, a silt, which is extremely fine material, how it moves, so if it actually slides down a hill, if it starts to rotate, so if you have like big rocks and they rotate as they tumble down the hill, and the speed of the movement of the mass. Those 3 things all influence how we classify mass movements. Okay, so the first type of mass movement is falls. So we have rock falls in particular. So we have rocks or rock fragments that fall freely through the air. So they tumble down the side of a mountain. It's very, very rapid, and it's common on very steep slopes. It can trigger other mass movements. So those rocks tumbling down can loosen other sediments as it rolls down a hill, and that can loosen the sediments. So once a rock fall occurs, or a landslide occurs, there is a pile of rock that accumulates at the bottom of the slope. This is called a talus. It's a pile of rock fragments that accumulates at the bottom of a slope where a rock fall has occurred. Okay, then we have slides. Slides are any type of material that moves suddenly along a flat or inclined surface. So for slides, you do not have to have a very steep surface. Mostly these are triggered by the substrate being very wet and saturated and coming loose. But being on a steep slope can increase the likelihood of a slide occurring. So there are 2 major types of slides. So we have landslides, and that's when finer particles are sliding down. So things like sand, silt, clays, things that make up soils usually is what we call a landslide. And then we also have rock slides. So that is when larger particles of sediment or rock actually slide down the slope. All right, our next kind of mass movement is a slump. So it's a downward movement of a block of material along a curved surface. So if you think about slumping down in your chair, that's kind of what the sediments are doing. They're slumping down the mountain. So it leaves a crescent-shaped cliff. So that's pretty important. So if we see a crescent-shaped cliff, we know that probably a slump occurred there. Another indicator that a slump has occurred is that there is some sort of rotational movement of the rock or soil, and we can usually tell that this has happened by the position of the vegetation where it used to be and then where it is. So we know that trees stand upright, so if we see a tree standing on its side but still with its roots in the soil, we know that that whole mass of soil had to rotate a little bit. Our next type of mass movement is a flow. So this is mass movements where there is a large amount of water in the soil or the sediment that's moving. And so it moves like a river might move down a river channel. So when a flow occurs, we can have either a mud flow, and that moves very quickly, and it's very, very fine particles. And then we also have an earth flow, and that's a little bit more of a slow movement. So we can slowly see a piece of the earth kind of sliding down a hillside. Our next and last type of mass movement is a creep. So this is the slowest type of mass movement, as you might have assumed from its name. It's usually caused from freezing and thawing, and so it's when so ice wedging is going to be a big starter of this. And so we're going to slowly have soil coming down a hillside. We're going to see tilted structures, but they haven't fallen over because it didn't happen that fast. And it's not going to cover up a whole road before we notice it, probably just part of it. So it's a very slow process. So this one is probably not as dangerous because it happens gradually over time. And so as long as you notice it, then you can pick up the cues and do something about it and save your property.